Hello again, guys. Ronald here, still not learning. Today we're going to take a look at a character who, for me, ties for the King of Curses himself for my second favorite character in Jujutsu Kaisen, Toji Fushiguro. Now, before we go any further, we're just going to go ahead and put the spoiler warning right up front on this one. At this point, anime episode 22, we haven't really met Toji. Basically, all of this video is spoilers for the anime crowd. As for the manga crowd, we may have even seen the full life arc of Toji already, insofar as we've seen him die for the second and what might be the last time. Of course, I kind of thought that was the first time, but so I guess who knows. Anyway, that's not to say that we've seen the whole of his story, as there's still plenty of unanswered questions lying around. Only that we may have seen the chronological end of his personal arc. Why is he a favorite of mine? Because without any cursed energy whatsoever, he managed to still effectively be a special grade entity. Why do I say he's special grade? Well, let's dive right into his storyline, and it'll become clear pretty darn quick. So our first real introduction to Toji comes at the start of the Star Plasma Vessel arc, or the Gojo flashback arc. An arc that kind of comes off as the Toji Fushiguro arc, as much as it is the Gojo flashback arc or the Fall of Geto arc, as we get most of our exposure to who he is and what we can do throughout this particular arc. He's essentially the big bad of the arc, the conductor of the events therein. I mean, Q and the Time Vessel, whatever organization, they're characterized as the big bads, but ultimately, the one who's actually doing things is Toji. We first meet Toji in chapter 66 of the manga, the second chapter of the flashback arc, where he speaks with his liaison with the Time Vessel Association, an organization that worships Master Tengen as a deity. More on that whole rigmarole when we dive into the storyline itself later. Long story short, these people want to keep Tengen from merging with the Star Plasma Vessel so that his power can evolve and he can become a pure version of himself, and to do this, they've hired the Sorcerer killer Toji Fushiguro. A point we get pretty early is the idea that Toji was born in the Zenin clan, but no longer uses the name of that clan, opting instead to use his wife's family name, Fushiguro. This kind of introduces one of the main, as yet unresolved issues surrounding this character. What exactly happened between him and his clan? We can infer from Maki's situation that perhaps he was treated the way she was, and had chosen to leave the clan because of that. But more than that, as we see later, he initially seemed to love his son, or at least that's seemingly implied shortly before his first death. Then decided to stop caring about anybody, including himself for some reason, and then sold his son back to the Zenin clan. We actually see him pretending he has no idea who Megumi is when asked at the start of the arc. What's up with that exactly? And I would contend that he's pretending that he doesn't remember Megumi's name. Later on, he just kind of randomly in the middle of a fight, it goes, oh, Megumi, his name means blessings. Well, it seems like he was thinking about him in the back of his head. So I think this whole who's that thing is, I think that's an act, but who knows. So did his wife die? And if so, how? Is that why he decided to not care about things anymore, to get away from the pain? We haven't actually heard very much of anything about Megumi's mother, but I'm sure we will at some point. A more minor aspect of Toji's personality that comes to light early is that he's a gambler, and not a very good one at that. He bets on horse racing, and we see him lose. Then we're introduced to the trait that kind of drives a lot of the arc, his tactical genius. He's confronted with what, on the surface, seems like an impossible situation. He has to assassinate a girl who's protected by multiple special-grade sorcerers, in particular Satoru Gojo and Suguru Geto, and later then Jujutsu High first years Kento Nanami and Yu Haibara, whose grades are never formally stated. However, there's some implication that at least Yu may be around grade 2 at the time. He starts off by putting a bounty on the Star Plasma Vessel with the advance he got from his own contract, simply letting anybody try and kill the girl with the intent of wearing down the special grades, naturally leaving out the information that she'll be guarded by special grades, right? So they just pretty much just like, hey, go get that guy. And then a bunch of curse users show up and they get their asses beat, predictably. So obviously he's counting on Gojo and Suguru's strength to protect the girl, and wanted to keep a threat right in their face, so they figured that once the online bounty is taken down, the threat would be over. This was more importantly a way to lull Satoru into thinking the threat has passed so that he'd turn off his infinity, leaving him relatively vulnerable, which works more or less how it's supposed to. By the time that actually happens, we're left with one of the more startling scenes in the manga thus far. Gojo getting stabbed in the back with a sword. And I'll stress that this is just a regular katana, no cursed energy involved. Which brings us to a good point to start discussing some of the basics of what makes Toji special. As Megumi puts it later in the Shibuya arc, the next and last time we see Toji, he's like a fully realized Maki. He has no cursed energy by way of a heavenly restriction, and so can't be sensed, and his movements can't be predicted with cursed energy perception. If he carries no cursed items on his person and externally, that is. Now, in exchange for this complete lack of cursed energy, his heavenly restriction grants him basically a superhuman heightening of all his normal functions. Super strength, super speed, super senses and reflexes. And when I say super, I mean super. The man literally takes down a special grade, Dagon, with his raw physical prowess, intimidating it into a sense of certain despair before it dies. He at one point was literally running on water like it was nothing. His speed is such that even young Gojo and his 6 eyes are taken aback. Megumi later notes that Toji in his Puppet of Carnage incarnation was faster than Two-Finger Sukuna. His strength is such that even Maki can't stop him from ripping Playful Cloud from her hands with seemingly no effort. His senses allow him to follow Geto to the secret passageway to Tengen's, despite a significant head start due to the battle with Gojo. At one point, when he notices an attack on him by one of Suguru's spirits that was already starting to cut off his ear, he's able to immediately retaliate and neutralize the threat, with reflexes and battle awareness that would shame even Todo's 530,000 IQ. Toji Fushiguro is like Batman to Satoru Gojo's Superman. With prep time, he didn't quite manage to kill Gojo, and he chose not to kill Geto, but he was able to complete his mission despite the odds seemingly being stacked away against him. Like Batman, he's got a cadre of interesting tools to help him get the job done. For one, he has a cursed spirit that seems to warp space, allowing it to store cursed items inside of it to be regurgitated for later use. On top of this, it can shrink into a little ball that Toji then swallows, allowing it to become invisible in his guts, implying that his insides, too, function as a black box to cursed energy. The invisible man with invisible guts, as he puts it. This is how he can move through barriers while holding cursed tools. How does he not die doing that? Swallowing the cursed spirit, that is. Well, his heavenly restriction doesn't just take his cursed energy away, it also makes him resistant to curses. In this cursed spirit, he stores things like an unnamed Japanese broadsword curse tool, the inverted spear of heaven, which forcibly terminates cursed techniques, and some normal non-cursed weapons. Of all things, he also includes a gun. Not like some super cursed gun, just a regular pistol. No joke, that's how he kills the Star Plasma Vessel. He just straight up shoots her with a gun. Which in the supernatural world of JJK is some baller shit right there. I mean, who does that? Now, after that initial stab in the back, Gojo somehow survives, and the true head-on battle between Gojo and Toji ensues. Going into it, you might figure Gojo's gonna win that shit, or at least leave Toji heavily wounded. But not so. Toji releases a swarm of fly heads, used like a chaff grenade as a distraction, while he sneaks up and stabs Gojo in the neck with the inverted Spear of Heaven, and then kind of finishes him off with like a knife stab in the forehead, nullifying his infinity and ending the battle, which again becomes one of the more startling panels of the manga to that point. And so it happened that, with his mission completed and his payment received, Toji started to walk away from the whole situation, to be immediately confronted with a wounded, mentally disjointed Gojo, who'd apparently managed to master a reverse curse technique for healing just in time to not die. Which, by the way, is probably one of the only assholes so far, is that he just managed to, master that just when he was dying. But hey, it's Gojo, so I guess to some extent it's believable. So with his newly mastered reverse curse technique, Gojo slams Toji into a wall with Red. Undaunted, Toji lays out his prepared strategies to counter the Infinity, Red, and Blue. Because as, a member of the Zenin clan, the Zenin, Kamo, Gojo, all that stuff, their major clan techniques are kind of known about, and they all have different strategies to try and get around them. So he plans to either dodge Blue and or nullify all of his other attacks with the inverted Spear of Heaven. It's a very convenient weapon right there. But as we see throughout the fight, Toji is uneasy about the whole thing. Normally he wouldn't do this much work without getting paid to, in his almost Nanami-esque way. Prep time is a big part of how he completed his mission, and it seems that he usually likes it that way. But this time, when confronted with the pinnacle of the Jujutsu world, he just couldn't back away. He had to spite the society that he had felt rejected him. What he didn't count on was the fourth secret technique of the Gojo clan. Imaginary technique Purple. Almost like with Hanami earlier on, we see Purple blow a good-sized hole in Toji's body. He dies, refusing to utter any last words at first until finally telling Gojo about his son and the deal to sell him to the Zenin clan, saying to do as he wishes with the information. Here we see the panel that makes me wonder about the supposed good-for-nothing character of Toji, as Gojo later tells it to Megumi. Holding Megumi as a baby, he seems happy, which by itself may not mean much, at least in a real-life context, but I'd guess it foreshadows here a bigger reveal about the Fushiguros later on. Now, the second time we see Toji is when Granny Ogami's Seance Curse technique summons his body to use against a second-grade sorcerer, Takuma Ino. What they didn't count on is that his spirit information resided within his body, and that summoning his body would also summon his spirit. This gets a little into the philosophical side of Jujutsu Kaisen that we see more when, Mahito and Getu are talking later on. The idea of whether the body and soul are separate. Basically, they accidentally fully revive Toji, who immediately turns around and kills Ogami with his bare hands for trying to order him around after nearly beating Takuma Ino to a pulp and throwing him off the building. As we are told later, the seance technique was supposed to end when the summoned body runs out of cursed energy. But since Toji doesn't consume cursed energy, the technique never ran out, reviving Toji in his entirety as an entity that fights on instinct, a puppet of Carnage baring his fangs at the strongest around. The next we see of him is during the fight with special grade spirit Dagon in Dagon's domain expansion, Horizon of the Captivating Skanda. Now, to put his feats during this fight into perspective, this is a fight between that spirit Dagon and Maki, who probably should be at least grade 2, maybe even grade 1. Naobito Zenin, who's introduced as a supreme grade 1 sorcerer, whatever the fuck that means, and thought to be the fastest sorcerer after Gojo himself. And Kento Nanami, who is grade 1. So pretty much 2 really, really powerful grade 1s and a grade 2, 1, whatever you would grade Maki, even though she's stuck at grade 4 because the world is unfair. A fight where the 3 of these sorcerers were pretty much getting crushed. I mean, that domain was absolutely fucking destroying them. It really doesn't seem that they would have stood a chance without the intervention of at least Megumi, with his own domain expansion to cancel the Death Swarm guaranteed hit. And even then it would have been a close thing. Because really, I mean, even if they could have escaped at all with that, and they were really just trying to escape, hoping that he wouldn't be able to use a second domain expansion, and that the ensuing fight outside of the domain would be able to, they'd be able to win. Not really guaranteed. They were getting destroyed. Because, I mean, what's-his-face? Naobito had already lost an arm then. And Nanami, I think, at that point, had even lost, half his face and stuff. So they were not doing too well. Then, just as they're about to escape, our boy Toji enters the scene. He takes Playful Cloud from Maki's hands effortlessly, as if she were some regular girl, and proceeds to stomp Dagon. I mean, god damn! Let's just take a moment to appreciate how crazy this fight is. I mean, just imagine what this is going to do for the anime when Mappa gets their hands on this shit. Just imagine this getting animated. Just imagine the glory of this fight. Watching Toji completely emasculate Dagon. He turns a special grade curse that was crushing some of the most powerful sorcerers in the world just a few moments ago into straight up sushi, all by himself, and all the while running on water like some kind of murder Jesus. He uses Playful Cloud to wreck Dagon's toughest Shikigami, and then just stabs him in the head until he's dead. There's some crazy shit right there. After, he pulls Megami out to street level, presumably, I guess I figured they thought he was going to kill him for whatever reason, but that doesn't really gel with the whole baring his fangs at the strongest around. In a room that contained, Naobito Zen and Nanami Kento, however damaged they were. There's a, quote, fight where Megami resigns himself to just limiting the damage so that Ieri can heal him up afterwards, but Toji interrupts his own rampage to ask Megami his name. He lauds the fact that Megami still goes by Fushiguro before stabbing Playful Cloud into his own head, ending the personal life arc of Toji Fushiguro for the second and possibly final time. Well, goddamn. That brings us to the end. That's who Toji Fushiguro is. His motivations, his powers, his death, so far as we know at this point. He really is one of the coolest characters in the manga, in my opinion. Or in any manga, honestly. I honestly enjoyed making this video. He's a really awesome character. Next up, we'll dive into the main story of JJK. Like and sub if you're interested.